on with the business of ensuring we build that brighter future for New Zealand.
I recognise the honourable member Andrew Williams.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Thank you very much. I take a call on behalf of New Zealand First on the non-bank deposit taker bill 2011, and isn't it a shame that when there was so much loving going on in this chamber and so much fondness and goodwill coming from the chairman of the Finance Committee and other members of the committee, that was all tossed out of one swift stroke of the pen by the Honourable Nick Smith. But that is the case, and it's unfortunate. It is, but it's quite normal. It's quite normal for the Honourable Nick Smith, because there's never a lot of loving coming from the Honourable Nick Smith normally. And on this occasion, and I used to find that when he was. And I used to find that when he was Minister of Local Government, there was no loving there at all. In fact, I don't think he liked local government one little bit. He hated local government. So this is just a continuation of that. But it is interesting that, and he did allude to the fact that the next Labor Speaker should raise this, but I'm not going to wait for the next Labor Speaker to raise it. I'm going to raise it myself, because he does overlook the fact that during this last term of this last national government, in the last 3 years, they sat on their hands for more than 6 months during that government retail deposit scheme while it was in operation, and the Reserve Bank and the Treasury, under this Minister of Finance, allowed billions of dollars of deposits to continue to be put into that government retail deposit scheme, billions of dollars to carry on, including South Canterbury Finance, which took massive amounts of deposits during that period, only to then subsequently fail. And under this government, they sat on their hands, and for a period of 6 months, there was no policing of the system, there was no oversight by the Minister of the system, and there was no good governance by this government to ensure that that government retail deposit scheme well and truly was under control. And as a result, the taxpayers of New Zealand can thank this government for losing a huge amount of additional money. There was already money being lost, but additional money that well may not have been lost had they been on top of the case, had they been on the ball, had they actually been keeping a control of the books. So, Mr Speaker, it is disappointing to hear the Honourable Nick Smith having a huge dig at the former Labor government over this, when, in fact, in more recent times, in the last 12 to 18 months, in fact, there have been some serious wrongful actions on the part of the government in not keeping a close look at the books. But back onto the non-bank deposit taker bill. This is a good bill. As we have said in this House before, New Zealand First will support good policy. This is a case of some more good policy coming out of this particular government, and we will, as a result, support it. And we've always said we will support good policy. And why wouldn't we, Mr Speaker, when this bill legislates a bolstering of the Reserve Bank's powers? And we're in favour of that, because what it allows for is the Reserve Bank to vet the suitability of directors and senior advisors appointed or elected to any of these non-bank deposit taker organisations. Well, that's a good thing. That's a good thing for the Reserve Bank to be able to vet the suitability of those directors and senior advisors. It also empowers the Reserve Bank to de-licence a non-bank deposit taker in prescribed situations. And again, that's a good thing. We like the idea that they can de-licence them if they are not up to scratch. This bill also requires the consent of the Reserve Bank in order for ownership changes to be given approval, where a person acquires 20% or more of that non-deposit bank deposit taker voting securities. Again, that's a good move, because if you start acquiring more than 20%, that starts becoming a significant stake in such an organisation, and therefore it should have the consent of the Reserve Bank in such a situation. It also allows the Reserve Bank to gain more information from those very same non-bank deposit takers. And again, as we have seen in the instance of South Canterbury Finance and some of the, had the Reserve Bank been in that position to gain more information at a much earlier stage and had not sat around for 6 months doing nothing, perhaps many of the investors around New Zealand in some of these organisations would not be in the sad situation they are today, having lost most, if not all, of their money in some of these organisations. And lastly, Mr Speaker, this bill allows the Reserve Bank to remove directors in special circumstances. Well, that's very good. And we like the idea that directors can be removed. We like the idea that perhaps directors who have been found to be acting either incompetently or perhaps in a misleading or fraudulent manner can be removed. So that's a good thing. And it is sad, Mr Speaker, that so many people have had to put up with such huge losses around New Zealand, while those very same organisations that have incurred those losses have had directors building mansions on Paratai Drive, buying luxury launches on Auckland Harbour, buying overseas holiday homes in the likes of Hawaii, and all sorts of other luxury items. And these sorts of people need to be taken to task, and the Reserve Bank does need to have the ability to remove such directors in special circumstances where clearly they are out of order. In the past 5 years or so, there have been a lot of instances in this case. This brings New Zealand into better line in relation to our partners such as Australia and other major investment countries that we deal with, and in terms of our banking system with the Australasian banks and the major banking organisations in this country. This is the non-banking sector. This is the what you would call the others, but it is important to note that this tidies up a lot of our banking financial services area and brings a lot of controls in that weren't there previously. Mr Speaker, it's important to point out that building societies and credit unions are also exempt from this piece of proposed legislation. So while perhaps people out there might think that this is taking a huge amount of the risk away, we do have to bear in mind that there is still a level of risk for any investor, and they still must be very, very vigilant in terms of what they do and how they deposit their money in various schemes. And we do still expect a great deal of caution on the part of any New Zealander and investor in any such banking scheme or any deposit scheme, as we all would do with our own money. Mr Speaker, I'd just like to close by saying New Zealand First supports any initiatives in this area to tidy up the financial markets in this country. There have been a number of bills in this House in the last month or so in other areas of international banking law, in other areas of international contract law, and in areas where to do with the Commerce Commission and tidying up some of these areas. Many of these are long overdue. It is sad that some of these bills have taken 2, 3, 4 years to get to this House. It is, I think, incumbent on the members in this House and from all parties to do our very best to try and tidy up many of these grey areas and many of these loopholes, to provide a much higher level of Mr Speaker, to provide a much higher level of security for the people in this country who are putting money into what often is their major savings schemes or their way of saving for retirement, and therefore anything we can do in this regard is supported by New Zealand First, and we support this bill.